The morning after my husband died, I stood in the kitchen staring at his empty chair like it might suddenly talk back to me. 42 years of marriage don't vanish quietly. They leave dents in furniture, grooves in habits, ghosts in every damn room. His coffee mug was still on the counter, ringed with yesterday's stain, and for a second I almost yelled for him to rinse it, like I always did. Then the silence hit. Thick, heavy. 18 months later, that silence still followed me around like a stray dog. The grief counselor said it would ease up, said time smooths the edges. She forgot to mention how lonely gets louder when everything else goes quiet. My name is Margaret Chin. I was 63, widowed, broke, and starting over in ways I never signed up for. Richard handled everything. Money, repairs, paperwork. By the time he passed, my bad hip slowed me down and my confidence was already shot. When I opened the accounts, reality punched me hard. Medical bills had eaten us alive. Insurance barely covered the funeral. Suddenly, love didn't pay rent. Survival did. And I had no clue how to survive alone. What was left after love? I sold the house we'd lived in for 3 decades, the one where our kids grew up and our fights echoed off the walls. Letting it go felt like ripping out a piece of my chest, but sentiment doesn't cover debt. After paying what I could, there wasn't much left. I packed memories into boxes, donated what didn't fit, and moved into a tiny one-bedroom on the outskirts of Minneapolis. Thin walls, noisy pipes, but it was mine. My daughter lived in Seattle, busy with her own life, calling when she remembered. My son was in Texas, juggling kids in chaos. I didn't blame them. Life moves on whether you're ready or not. I needed income, purpose, something to get me out of bed. At 63, with a limp and outdated skills, options were slim. The Good Shepherd Senior Center took a chance on me. Part-time receptionist, $12 an hour, 25 hours a week. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave my days shape. I ironed my blouses, caught the bus, smiled at strangers. For the first time since Richard died, I felt useful again. Not happy, not healed, just standing. And sometimes, standing is enough to keep you from falling apart. The bench outside the library. Every morning, my bus rolled through downtown, past glass buildings and tired sidewalks. I got off 2 stops early so I could walk, doctor's orders for my hip, plus I needed the air. That's when I noticed him. Same bench, same spot. An elderly black man with white hair and kind eyes, wearing a faded green jacket no matter the weather. A paper cup sat near his feet, but he never asked for a thing. No shouting, no signs, just quiet dignity. Something about him reminded me of my dad, the way he sat up straight like pride was muscle memory. The first time I stopped, my words came out clumsy. I dropped $5 in his cup and muttered goodbye. He looked up, smiled soft, and said, "God bless you, ma'am. You got a kind heart." I walked away with tears burning my eyes, confused as hell about why. After that, it became routine. A few dollars, a nod, then conversations. His name was Samuel Washington, 74, former high school history teacher, widow, pension stolen in some scam, apartment sold when the building with condo crazy, shelter when there was space, street when there wasn't. Hearing his story lit something angry inside me. A man who gave his life to kids, now invisible to the world. I didn't know it yet, but stopping at that bench was about to change everything. 2 lives moving side by side. Samuel and I talked every morning about weather, books, loss. He asked about my job, my kids, how I was holding up. He listened like it mattered, like I mattered. In this new, quiet version of my life, that meant more than I could admit. Months passed, seasons flipped. I got a tiny raise. My daughter called with pregnancy news. My son sent a birthday card. Life crept forward. Then one cold Tuesday in March, I saw Samuel standing instead of sitting. His eyes were sharp, scanning the street like prey nearby. When he spotted me, he rushed over and grabbed my arm, hard. "Mrs. Margaret," he whispered, voice tight. "You gotta listen. Something's wrong." My heart slammed. "Samuel, what is it?" He pulled me closer, out of earshot. "Your job, the senior center. Watch the new bookkeeper, red hair, donation records." I stared at him confused. "And don't go home tonight," he added. "Sleep somewhere else." Fear crawled up my spine. "How do you know this?" I shouted. He shook his head. "People talk around me like I ain't there." His eyes pleaded. "Trust me. Come back tomorrow. I'll show you." I promised. I didn't know why, but something in his voice told me this wasn't paranoia. This was warning. The day everything tilted. Work felt off from the second I walked in. I smiled, answered phones, but my nerves were shot. The director, Patricia Holloway, pulled me aside later, asking about donation discrepancies. My stomach twisted. That afternoon, she admitted it. Money was missing, nearly 40 grand. Police were coming. I left on shaky legs and checked into a cheap hotel instead of going home. That night, my phone rang at 2 a.m. A police sergeant told me there'd been a fire in my apartment building, my floor, my unit badly damaged. If I'd been home, I might not be alive. Morning couldn't come fast enough. I went straight to the library. Samuel stood when he saw me. "You're alive," he said, voice breaking. He showed me a notebook filled with dates, names, conversations overheard, photos, proof. Patricia was involved. The fire wasn't an accident. I realized then that the homeless man I'd helped with spare change had been watching, listening, protecting me. And that kindness, small and simple, had just saved my life. The Notebook of Truth. Samuel's notebook shook in my hands as I flipped through the pages. Dates, times, names scribbled tight, like he was afraid the truth might leak out if he loosened his grip. He told me how he'd overheard conversations on that bench, people bragging, plotting, laughing about money meant for old folks who could barely afford their meds. He said they talked about me, called me the old receptionist, said I was asking questions. I hadn't been really, but someone thought I was a risk. That's when they decided I needed to disappear. A fire, an accident, end of story. My stomach rolled. I kept thinking about Patricia's calm face, the way she looked me in the eye and said she trusted me. "We gotta go to the cops," I whispered. Samuel nodded and pressed the notebook into my hands like it weighed 100 pounds. "You go," he said. "I'll back you up." I hesitated. "Samuel, this could put you in danger." He smiled, tired but steady. "Ma'am, I've been invisible a long time. If doing this makes me seen, even for a minute, it's worth it." I hugged him right there on the sidewalk, not caring who stared. For the first time since Richard died, I didn't feel alone. I felt like part of something bigger than my grief. Walking into the storm. The police station smelled like stale coffee and old carpet. I sat in a hard plastic chair clutching Samuel's notebook, my leg bouncing like it had a mind of its own. When the detective finally called my name, I told him everything about the missing money, Patricia's confession, Samuel's warnings, the fire. At first, he looked skeptical. Hell, I didn't blame him. I was a 63-year-old widow with a limp and a wild story. But then I slid the photos across the table. Patricia, her brother, the others. His expression changed fast. Things moved quick after that. Auditors, investigators, people asking me the same questions over and over. They wired Samuel with a recorder. He hated it but did it anyway. A week later, arrests came down like thunder. Patricia tried to cry her way out. Her brother lawyered up. Tiffany folded in 20 minutes. The fire was ruled arson. They told me I'd been the fall guy, the perfect one, old, alone, no one to raise hell. That realization burned worse than the fire ever could. But the worst part? Samuel collapsed 3 days later. I found him in a hospital bed, hooked to machines, skin gray. "I'm sorry," he whispered. I grabbed his hand and said the only truth I knew. "You saved me. Now it's my turn." Fighting for the man who fought for me. Samuel was dying when I met him. That's what the doctor said, blunt as hell. Years on the street had wrecked his body. Untreated diabetes, kidneys failing, malnutrition eating him from the inside out. I sat by his bed every day, talking, holding his hand, reading him the news. When the trial started, he testified from a wheelchair in a borrowed suit, voice calm, spine straight. Watching him, I remembered him telling me he'd taught history for 35 years. Standing up for truth was muscle memory. After the verdicts came down, guilty across the board. I didn't feel relief. I felt responsibility. I called social workers, legal aid, nonprofits. I told Samuel's story to anyone who would listen. People stepped up. Donations poured in. A lawyer fought to recover part of his pension. A housing nonprofit found him an apartment. The day he moved in, he looked around like he'd walked into a dream. "All this," he said softly, "because you stopped at a bench." I laughed through tears. "No, Samuel, because you stood up when it mattered." Ripples. Life didn't magically fix itself after that. Healing never does, but it shifted. My daughter visited more. My son called just to check in. I went back to work. Different center, same mission. I watched numbers closer. I trusted slower. Every morning I still rode the bus, still walked the last 2 stops. Only now I stopped at Samuel's apartment instead of a library bench. We drank cheap coffee and talked about history, about choices, about how small acts make ripples you never see coming. I was 65, still limping, still grieving, but I was alive, and I knew something I hadn't before. Kindness isn't weak. It's dangerous to the wrong people. It sees things. It saves lives, mine included. Learning to breathe again. After everything blew up, I expected my nerves to calm down, but grief and shock don't work on a schedule. Some mornings I woke up gasping like I'd been underwater all night. Other days I felt oddly peaceful, like I'd already survived the worst thing imaginable, and everything else was just noise. I moved slower now, not just because of my hip, but because I'd learned rushing made me miss things that mattered. At the new senior center, I watched people more closely, the way they spoke, the way they avoided eye contact. I trusted my gut instead of brushing it off. Samuel called me every evening from his apartment, proud as hell to tell me what he cooked or which kid he helped at the library. Hearing his voice grounded me. It reminded me that the world still had good bones under all the rot. One night he said, "You know, Margaret, we both got a second chance." I laughed softly. Feels more like my first real one. Outside my window, the city hummed. Sirens, traffic, life moving forward whether I was ready or not. For the first time since Richard died, I didn't feel like I was being dragged along. I felt like I was walking beside it. Ghosts of a quiet marriage. Richard's ghost still followed me sometimes. Not the man himself, but the habits he left behind. Reaching for the phone to ask permission, feeling guilty for spending money on myself, apologizing when I didn't need to. 42 years of marriage doesn't just fade out because the heart stops beating. One afternoon, I stood in a grocery aisle staring at 2 brands of coffee, frozen. Richard always bought the cheap one, always. I grabbed the better brand just to prove I could, then cried in my car like I'd committed a crime. Healing is messy like that. Samuel told me once that history books never talk about the years after wars, the quiet rebuilding. He said that's where the real work is. I started seeing a grief counselor again, not because someone told me to, but because I wanted to understand myself without Richard's shadow looming over every choice. Slowly, I learned that independence didn't mean loneliness. It meant ownership of my time, my money, my damn coffee. The trials echo. After the convictions, the trial echoed through my life. Reporters called. Strangers stopped me at work. Some treated me like a hero, others like a victim. I was neither. I was just a woman who'd listened. Patricia's sentencing hit me harder than I expected. Seeing her led away in handcuffs, eyes empty, didn't bring satisfaction. It brought clarity. Evil doesn't always look evil. Sometimes it looks organized, polite, trustworthy. I thought about how close I'd come to being erased, how easily the story could have ended with my name in a small column under tragic accident. That knowledge made me stubborn as hell about staying visible. I started speaking at staff meetings, sharing my experience, warning people not to assume safety just because something feels familiar. Samuel attended one of my talks, sitting in the front row, nodding like a proud teacher. Afterwards, he said, "You're teaching now, too." I shook my head. "Nah, just telling the truth." He smiled. "That's the best lesson there is." A new kind of family. My family didn't magically fix itself either, but cracks began to seal. My daughter visited with the baby, Eleanor, bundled in pink and soft as a whisper. Holding her stirred something fierce in me, a need to protect futures I'd never see fully unfold. My son stayed longer that Christmas, helped me hang lights, asked questions he'd never asked before. "Were you lonely, Mom?" he asked quietly one night. I answered honestly, "Yeah, I was." He hugged me, awkward but sincere. Samuel joined us for dinner that year, wearing a sweater my daughter bought him. Watching him read a picture book to Eleanor felt surreal. Two lives that should have never crossed, bound by accident and choice. That's when I understood family wasn't just blood or obligation. It was who showed up when things went sideways, who listened, who stayed. The weight of small choices. People kept asking me how it felt to change everything. I hated that phrase. I didn't change everything. I stopped. That was it. I stopped for a man on a bench. Samuel and I talked about that a lot. He said history turned on moments like that, tiny decisions that didn't look heroic at the time. He said, nobody wakes up planning to save a life. They just decide not to look away. I carried that with me. I smiled more at strangers, spoke up when something felt off, offered help without assuming it wouldn't matter. My life wasn't suddenly big or flashy, but it felt solid, earned, like I was finally living inside my own skin. When fear loosened its grip, the nightmares faded slowly. Fire, smoke, voices whispering my name. I learned to breathe through them, to remind myself I was safe. Samuel's health stabilized. Mine improved too. Walking hurt less. Laughing came easier. One afternoon, sitting on a park bench, not the library one, I realized I hadn't thought about dying in weeks. That felt like a victory. Fear had run my life for too long. Fear of loss, fear of being alone, fear of being invisible. Now it felt smaller, manageable, like something I could carry without letting it carry me. Giving back without keeping score. I never told my story expecting anything in return, but kindness has a way of circling back. I was invited to join an advisory board at the center. Samuel started a history club at the library. Kids loved him. Parents trusted him. Watching him thrive filled a hole I didn't know I had. We never kept score, who saved who more. That wasn't the point. The point was showing up again tomorrow and the next day.
aging without disappearing. Getting older in America can feel like fading out. People talk over you, past you, like you're already gone. I refuse that. I spoke louder when needed, asked questions, took up space. Samuel did the same. We joked about being elder rebels, but there was truth there. Visibility is power. Lessons no one teaches. No one teaches you how to start over at 63, or how to trust after betrayal, or how to accept help without shame. You learn it by stumbling, by failing forward, by letting people surprise you. I learned that goodness isn't loud, it's persistent. The ripple keeps moving. Sometimes I still pass the library bench. It's empty now. I sit there a minute anyway, just to remember. One small act, one ripple, still moving, still reaching places I'll never see. That thought humbles me and steadies me. What I know for sure. Here's what I know for sure. Kindness isn't weak. It's brave as hell. It notices. It listens. It steps in when walking away would be easier. I was a lonely widow with spare change. Samuel was a homeless man everyone ignored. Together, we proved that ordinary people can interrupt evil just by paying attention. So if you take anything from my story, let it be this. Stop when you can. Look when others don't. Be kind on purpose. You never know whose life you're changing. Sometimes it's your own.